Well, hey, it's Mazzy here, and I'm in Seattle, USA, and I have John in Birmingham, who on YouTube and the vinyl community, I'm going to say it in the Texas accent because it's 6 inch pianist. If I
Yeah,
say pianist, and I know every time I've seen you on these, when someone introduces you, you kind of like have that response. It's 6 inch pianist,
that's
and
it. So my channel name is 6 Inch Pianist 319. It's just a crap pun. I really wish that I'd thought about my channel name before I started making videos. But there you go.
all right. And this is actually John's idea for this format we're doing, this concept. So I'm going to John to introduce it, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. I really like the music press. I read music monthlies and music magazines, music papers. And the first section that I always turn to are the reviews. Now, the sort of person I am is that if I see a 5-star review, I tend to ignore it. But if I see a 1-star review, a record that's been absolutely panned, that piques my interest. So the idea is to show 10 glorious failures, records which were perhaps panned by the critics at the time or didn't sell well, but for whatever reason I like. And what got me thinking about this was that last week, one of the days last week, I woke up at some ungodly hour. Everybody was still asleep in the house. So I got up and I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll listen to Stevie Wonder's journey through the secret life of plants in its entirety. So 4 o'clock in the morning last Tuesday, I sat down and listened to this. I don't think I've ever listened to this album all the way through previously. And it's a record that gets absolutely hammered. It was a follow-up to Songs in the Key of Life. It came out 3 years later. And at the time, everybody hated it because Songs in the Key of Life was so good. It was a classic. But the problem was this is basically a soundtrack to a film. It's a soundtrack to a documentary about plants. And Motown were desperate for a follow-up to Songs in the Key of Life. So they marketed it as the follow-up to Songs in the Key of Life, which it isn't. Half of it's instrumental, half of it's song-based, but all of the songs are about plants, So that's it. But I think it's got a real charm about it. Let's face it, Stevie Wonder, he's one of the nice guys, isn't he? So if anybody can get away with writing a song about a plant or a flower, then, or foliage, Stevie
I
can.
used to have that record, and because, as you know, I'm the generation when I worked in record stores, that album came out, and of course, there's two albums that I like to like every decade. I think I'm going to like it again and try it. That's one of them. The other one is, which I did not include here because I don't have it anymore because I always deface copies. I buy it. Is Elton John's Blue Moves.
Yeah.
There's like two great songs on there, but
Yeah.
for me, I can't stand that record, and that was a follow up to some great hits, and that's the same with that record. I don't have it anymore.
No, it's got some nice moments, but you just got to take it for what it is. It's a soundtrack album to a documentary about flowers. It's not the follow up to Songs in the Key of Life, but
No,
it's got some lovely moments on it. Lovely moments on it.
Terrible. Okay, I forgot to mention. I should have said at the top. There's a link below to John's channel. I am in awe of his collection, his knowledge of soul music, R&B, Motown from 50s, 60s, 70s, mostly, but even beyond that. He has this amazing collection, and yeah, you've watched a few of my things, I know, and I can get a little snarky. And I've always wanted to like parody certain people, and you're like, yeah, all right, yeah, all right, yeah, oh. I just, I say that with all the love and respect of that stuff. We all have our little things that we say. I just love how you have I guess you have a table in front of you and you're picking these records up, and I just love that presentation.
Right. So I actually kneel down when I'm doing my videos, just to keep them short, because so that's basically it. So I'm in this little room normally upstairs. I'm somewhere different today, but I'm normally in this little record room, kneeling down. I've got bad knees, so all of my videos last about 2 minutes, just purely so that I can, to stop the pain. That's like basically it.
You kneel on, like at the church or something.
Yeah, that's something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I picked a bunch of records, and they're not all bad records. Some of which, and here's the thing that worked for me. I thought this, when you first suggested this concept, I thought, oh, that's easy. Then I started looking through my collection and saying, all the bad record, the supposedly bad records of most of these people, I love. Like you said, I mean, it gets a shitty review of that artist. I end up liking it, and there'll be a couple later. First, the one I'm gonna start out with is a record that I don't think I love, and a number of people have showed it. And as soon as I give you the little setup, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm a 10cc fan, and
Mm.
when 10cc essentially, I like to call them, became 5C because they kind of split up in two different divisions. I'm going with the Eric Stewart side of it, but the creative guys, the really kind of esoteric guys, Lol Krem and Kevin Godley, invented the Gizmo, this device.
Yeah.
I don't even get into what that's fucking about. Make this 2 or 3 record set. I don't even remember.
I think it's 3 records, isn't it?
3 records. Okay, there you go. I got a promo of this when it came out, and there is that one great track of who's the soul singer on it.
I've never heard it. I've never heard that album.
There's one great. You'll know this woman because she's right up your alley in terms. I got to remember. I mean, not Diana Washington, but someone like that. I should have looked at that beforehand. And the narration was written and performed by Peter Cook, of course. You
right? Okay, yeah.
Know who that is? Oh, Sarah Vaughan is on here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And that's a really good track. The rest of it is semi-unlistenable. And it's one of those famous records you see that nobody even knows. Nobody seems to, like, I've heard it maybe 10 to 15 times ever, and I still don't remember if what it sounds like. And this is again one of those records that, some years later I put it on thinking, oh, now's the time. I like avant-garde, I like strange things. I put it on and I can't stand it. But the Sarah Vaughan track is good. It's so bizarre that Sarah Vaughan's on this record.
But what were they thinking when they released that? What did they think was going to happen with that record? That's the sort of thing that I find fascinating, because surely they knew that it was going to tank. They couldn't have thought they got a hit record there.
Well, Mercury said, okay, you got this Gizmo and we wanted 3 records in a box. You did great with 10cc, I'm Not in Love and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm a Beatlesque power pop, and Eric Stewart and let's see, the guy who wrote For Your Love and all the stuff.
Yeah.
Byrds, No Milk Today, Graham Goldman.
Yeah. Yeah. So when is that from? Is that about 76? Is it that album?
78, 77.
Is it right? I think. Right. Okay.
Yeah. 77 hologram. So you could probably find it cheap, and it just that's the one record I think of all these. Well, one of 2 that I absolutely can't stand, but I can't get rid of it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Another sort of similar type thing. This is Neil Young's Trance. Have you got a copy there of you?
Yeah. Keep going with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this has also got its, it's got its charms. It's obviously at the time it was much maligned, but I do think that now I think it sounds good. It's clumsy, it's a bit naive, but it's I think it's a fun record. I mean, I think the story behind it is that he recorded many of the songs with the full Crazy Horse band, didn't he? And then went away and took off all their parts and replaced it with synthesizers and, of course, that vocoder vocal. But I think it's got it sounds. You can tell that the songs weren't written to be recorded as electronic songs, which is what they are. But I think it does work. It's got its charms. What do you think?
I would agree with you. I never listened to it anymore. I mean, he was really screwing with David Geffen. I mean, I like the rock and roll 50s records and stuff, but he made these records. Crash Landing, or also not Crash Landing, whatever. But he made a series of records that just are considered like nobody really cares about them. It seems like. I mean, they have their moments. I recently did a Neil Young ranking. Of course, I had none of the Geffen records, and of course, there's always people that like this is in their top 10 of a Neil Young record. It's always like that. But oh God.
But it's
good. I don't have to talk.
Yeah, but it was didn't Geffen sue him on the back of this record?
Yes.
Or on the back of that run of records?
Yes. What is it? 4 or 5 records he made for Geffen, and most of them were like it. And of course, then after that, he gets in back with Reprise, and he just makes kind of regular records again. Young records, and you know, I mean, Neil Young is one of those guys like the Stephen King of record making. He's always putting out a book every week or a record every week.
Yeah.
Now a reissue, and I tend to like a lot of them. One I didn't pick would reminded me because a lot of people I talk to don't like it. I don't know if you've heard Lanois.
No.
Daniel Lanois produced it, and it's that Lanois like tape loops and all. And I think brilliant record. And it doesn't get a lot of love, but it's not like terrible like this. So
yeah, right. No, I mean, I wouldn't describe that as terrible. You know, that's the thing about it, is the fact, you know, the vocoder vocal, I think, works on those songs. Is, you know, I'm pretty sure that if he sat down and intended to write electronic music, it wouldn't sound like that. But the fact that it's this sort of halfway house between a traditional song with these added sounds to it, I think it, you know, it makes it quite unique. It's quite nice.
Okay.
Right. Something I'm sure you can relate to here. Right. Okay. You didn't pick it, no? Right. Okay. So yeah. So sometime in New York City, John and Yoko. So this album has been described as, what is it? The worst album ever made by a mainstream artist. So that straight away made me want to hear it, you know. So yeah, so it's a bit of a strange time as well. I'm fascinated by the Beatles, or the ex-Beatles in the early 70s. I know obviously you've read a lot of Beatles books, but this is my favorite Beatles book, You Never Give Me Your Money, by Peter Doggett, which is mainly about the business side of the Beatles. And I mean, particularly with this album, you know, for the period after their split through to the mid-70s, you know, despite the fact that the band had split up, their lives were still intertwined by the fact that they were all still part of Apple. They were all still releasing music through Apple. So you've got this strange situation that they're all sharing the royalties in each other's records for that period. So, for example, when All Things Must Pass was put out by George Harrison, each of the four Beatles received 25% royalties on the record sales on that album. And that's what happened with all of the solo releases through to the mid-70s. Now, this album is interesting. George. Yeah, so yeah, that's right, you know.
Right.
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, and it's interesting because through that 5-year period, both Paul and George outsold John considerably. Ringo outsold him as well. Yeah, so he was the you know, the Beatle that sold the fewest records during that 5-year period. And you know, this album comes out. This is 1972, I think, isn't it? And it's interesting because late in 72, the Beatles obviously signed to Capitol. They had this situation where if each of the ex-Beatles solo records sold over 500,000 copies, they would get an increase in their royalty rate with Capitol. Now, shortly before that was due to happen, John Lennon went to Alan Klein, who's obviously management at the time, and says, I want to put out a double album, half live, half studio, and it's a political record. And obviously, Alan Klein at the time, he's not stupid. He realizes that this record is not going to sell 500,000 units, you know? So he went to a Capitol record, cap in hand, to basically negotiate that this record wasn't part of the deal. So they still got their bump in royalties, and it didn't sell 500,000 copies. It sold, you know, far fewer than that. But it's a record that I really like. I mean, the live record, I think, is, you know, you can do without.
You mean this record he stole from Frank Zappa and put out?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Of course, yeah, you know. So, but the studio record, despite the fact that it sounds like it's recorded in a cardboard box, I mean, the production on it is pretty awful. But the actual material, I think it's got a real energy. There you go. Look, yeah, there you go. I think it's got a real energy about it. Obviously, it's political. You know, the songs are about, you know, Angela Davis, John Sinclair, Attica State.
Songs on here. Luck of the Irish is a great folk.
Yeah. Sunday Bloody Sunday, a great song. I like Yoko's vocals on this record as well.
John Sinclair's a great song.
Yeah, Sister Oh Sister, you know, really good songs, but it just suffers from an appalling production sound. I mean, Phil Spector, I mean, you know, obviously he's got a lot to answer for, Phil Spector, but you know, particularly this.
Look at a free live jam LP is included.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a fan of that bit, but but there you go. So yeah, I mean, I like a lot of John Lennon's music from the early 70s. I do have an issue with the production on a lot of those records. I mean, particularly, obviously, that album, Sometime in New York City, Mind Games as well, I think sounds really muddy. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, some great songs in there.
John Lennon as a producer took away the bad things of Phil Spector. Phil Spector could do it, could work it out for the most part, whether you like the Wall of Sound or not. I happen to really like the sound. I listened to it recently again. I have an original, beautiful pressing still, a couple of All Things Must Pass. And I know a lot like they're all the revisionists now. We want a stripped down version, get all that Spector crap and echo. And even George said that apparently 20 years ago. But I think that album sounds really good.
Yeah.
But John Lennon was starting to produce, and actually that leads me into my choice because as a producer, John Lennon shouldn't have been a producer for anyone else. And who's the singer of the late 60s and also the 70s who had the most beautiful voice?
Harry Nilsson.
Harry Nilsson.
Yeah. That album. You're right to pick that.
You listen to, everybody's talking the Fred Neil song that was used in The Night Cowboy or Without You. And I'm a big fan of a lot of people who like his pop stuff didn't like the Derek Taylor produced A Touch of Schmielson the night, the oldies.
Yeah.
He was the first guy that did that, the standards.
Yeah.
Nelson Riddle, I think, or is it Gordon Jenkins? I forgot which orchestra leader. That's a beautiful record. I love that record. It's gorgeous. His, during the Lost Weekend in LA with John and Harry Nilsson and Alice Cooper, all that drinking and all the rowdiness that went on. Nilsson, between alcohol and cocaine and all the crap, just his voice was shot. And this Lennon, this record, Pussycats and RCA, John and what a pair in the studio. I could just imagine what that was like. And John Lennon's not a good drunk. Not that anyone's a good drunk, but he's like a volatile asshole. This voice of Harry Nilsson, his voice is shot on this record. His version of Subterranean Homesick Blues with that, it's that Phil Spector sound, but not as good as Phil Spector. Although, having said that, this actually, there's some things that have grown, and I love, even though I love his version of Many Rivers to Cross on here. He just belts it out. It's not a good voice, but that's despite,
Yeah, I really don't like that album for all the reasons you just mentioned there. Harry Nilsson had the most beautiful voice, a wonderful songwriter as well. Any of his late 60s records, particularly the Harry album, I think is from about 69, is it? An absolutely gorgeous record. And you mentioned Everybody's Talking, obviously, which was used in Midnight Cowboy. He wrote the song...
New York City.
Yeah. So, and I'd love to have seen that song used in the film rather than Everybody's Talking.
I think it's
a gorgeous song.
Credits. I think it's
yeah.
Not the
but yeah. So you made some great music, but then you get to that stage when you get past the early 70s where he totally mistreated his voice and misused his voice, and you end up with Pussycats, which sounds absolutely appalling. His voice is totally shot there at that point. He's gone. And I imagine that Lennon had a big part to play in that. So I don't know.
It's not they're hanging out with the Ringo. It was just a bad time. And and I'm a big Harry Nilsson fan. I always thought it was ironic that two of his he's an amazing songwriter, like you said. His two biggest hits he didn't write.
Yeah.
Without You, the Badfinger song, Pete Ham song.
Yeah.
And which was huge. And of course but Nilsson, Schmielson, and Son of Schmielson are great records. So
I think they are. I think Without You, I think that the song, Nilsson's recording of it is a perfect record. He sounds like he was, born to sing that song. It's it's an incredible performance.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah. Right. Okay. Right. Something a little bit different, or something very different. Why not? So a CD now. You recognize this? This is
I didn't think that, but I don't have that anymore.
Right, so this is Lou Reed and Metallica and the Lulu album. So this must come out 10 years ago, is it? Yeah, 2011. Now, I find this album fascinating because, at the time, Metallica fans hated it because, what's Lou Reed doing on a Metallica album? And Lou Reed fans hated it because, hey, what's Metallica doing on the Lou Reed album? But I think it's got a real energy about it. It's clearly recorded it in the studio together. You can hear that in Lou Reed's performance. He's really buoyed, he's really energized by, performing with Metallica. And I just think that they really suit each other. Now, it took me a long time to get into this, but I think this is an album that will be reevaluated. There's a great performance.
I want to get a copy of it.
I'd love to get a copy on vinyl. Actually, the artwork's fantastic as well.
It's a great,
yeah. So I mean, it's a record that I've gone back to quite a bit over the last few months, and so I say great images. But I think it's something that will be reevaluated. I know Bowie was a big fan of this record. He thought that it was Lou Reed's best work for a number of years. But yeah, there's a great performance of them doing a track from this Iced Honey on Later with Jules Holland, the UK TV program. I remember seeing it at the time. Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's worth checking out. But yeah, it's an interesting record.
Okay. Since we're talking about Phil Spector, and when Columbia Records, Warner Brothers, I should say, gets a hold of this guy for a blink of an eye, wants to hook him up with a series of producers, this is what happened.
Right. Okay.
I like this record. But it's such a shit show for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's got that, of course, the thick wall of sound with all the layers of horns and guitars and just, again, Phil Spector. But on top of that, even if you take all that away, this is probably one of the most direct, sexist, misogynist in a way. Maybe not, because we all like, the ladies' man, Leonard Cohen, like this hunk, this poet, this singer. He sings, I mean, the name of these songs, if you haven't heard this, I Left a Woman Waiting. Okay, depending on how you want to describe that. Death of a Ladies' Man, Don't Go Home with Your Heart On. I just want to see your naked body. I mean, it's a heroic album.
That's one word for it.
Interesting album. I friggin' love this record, but it's not.
Yeah, I've never heard it, Mazzy. I've never heard it.
Okay, well, now you're going to check it out, because
I am. Yeah.
Obviously, I'm a big Leonard Cohen fan. I like his last few albums. His voice is shot, but he's got this quality, and what he did. His first half of his career was a lot of stuff was acoustic guitar based, and he always used amazing background women singers, not the big soulful gospel, like these like white women singing behind him in a really kind of a nice voice that softened his almost speak talk, that he does.
Yeah.
And I love those records. And then later when he got it, when Columbia dropped him, I guess, and after this, and I think when he started writing some great things again, obviously like Hallelujah and all those songs, he started getting more keyboard based and sort of electronic type. Obviously, First We'll Take Manhattan is like that. And with all those great singers in the background, this is unusual. It's like that dividing point between the first side and the this is 78, I think it came out, 77, 78 again.
Yeah.
I think it bombed, but everyone I know hated this record. But I remember driving with my girlfriend at the time, and I had a cassette of this in the car, and her and I just loved it. We were driving up the coast to Oregon from California, and we were cracking up. It was just so funny. So on Warner Spector, produced by Phil Spector, songs by Spector and Cohen.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, I'll check it out. I know his later stuff better than the earlier folkier music. Yeah, the more electronic stuff. So yeah, no, but I'll give it a listen. Good stuff. Right. Okay, so I don't know whether you know this record. This is Dexys Midnight Runners, Don't Stand Me Down.
I've seen that, but I don't know it. Right.
So whenever I talk about Dexys Midnight Runners, I always start off by saying I think that Kevin Rowland is a genius. So in the early 80s, that Dexys made 3 albums. It started off with Searching for the Young Soul Rebels, which is that sort of soul boy sound. They then changed it with Tu Royer, which came out, I think, about 82, where they introduced the fiddles and the dungarees and all that sort of stuff, and Come and Eileen. And then this came out in the mid-'80s. This, I say, Don't Stand Me Down. Now, this absolutely bombed. And it is really the case of the band sabotaging the record. They didn't promote it. No single came out before the album. It just sort of appeared. I don't think people really understood the new look either. You can see it's that sort of Ivy League tailored suited look. And I say the album came out and disappeared. It got pretty much mixed reviews at the time, but I think now is beginning to be considered a bit of a classic. Now, what I find interesting here is that when the album was reissued in the late 90s, so about 15 years later, Kevin Rowland, he changed the artwork on it. He changed the running order of the album. He actually introduced a new opening track, which was recorded at the time, but wasn't on the original album. And it's clear that the failure of, the commercial failure of the record had rankled with him all those years, that, when he got the chance to reissue it, he totally changed it. But if you don't know it, check it out. The interesting thing about it is that, there's a lot of albums that have spoken word sections. This album actually has conversations in it. So, in between tracks, you've got members of the band just chatting just about what they're going to do tonight, where they've been, that sort of stuff. It's fascinating. It's a great record. The songs are strong, and Kevin Rowland's got that voice. Clearly in his head he sounds like Al Green or someone, but it's a totally different sound. And I'd recommend it to anyone. It's a great album.
That cover looks like a Bell and Sebastian cover.
It does, yeah. It's got you can see the
Scottish
song,
or whatever.
Yeah,
Plaid.
yeah. But yeah, if you don't know it, Mazzy, check that one out. It's a cracking album.
Okay. My next choice is not an album that people hated, but people didn't get. And it was an aberration in the style of music he was doing. And he didn't sell a lot of records. He had a cult following. And of course, as I'm building this up, because I like to build things up, his son almost became more popular than he did. And they both died young, tragic deaths. And that's Tim Buckley.
Right.
I'm a big fan of his freak folk. We didn't call it freak folk then. It's obviously Dolphins, or that Porpo, whatever the song was he plays on the Monkees show. But what a great soulful voice for a folk singer. A lot of folk singers don't have that soulful voice. I promote this record anytime I can. I bought it when it came out in 72, I believe. 1972. Side one, do you know this record?
Yeah.
The side one to me is it's a funky record. It's a soul record on side, white, blue-eyed soul on side one. Get on Top of Me, Move With Me, Sweet Surrender. Those three songs make up side one. To me, it's a perfect trilogy of songs that they're sweeping. The bass and the guitar, it's like almost like a dance record, this is a record you just turn up. Original copy had the postcard. Didn't take that out. You could clip it out.
Yeah.
Obviously, when LA, Los Angeles had all this, literally, it used to look like this, all this smoke. But I think side one is a perfect side. It escaped a lot of people. They didn't go to it. Again, I don't even remember what the reviews were like at the time, but it wasn't what he was about. And of course, his son is Jeff Buckley, who everyone knows because of Hallelujah, and he drowned at early age, and his father, I think around the same time. I don't know if he's a member of the 27 Club, but he died way too young too. But anytime I show this record, I did an early video when I first started this, and I played like that. I plastered that track as a needle drop, and like 5 or 6 people just said, I got to grab that. It's just one of those great soulful, and you're the soul guy here, but
he made some other soulful records on that time. The Sefronia album as well, that's a really nice soulful record. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, really nice record. But obviously then he went more avant-garde as the 70s went on, and quite recently
early stuff with the symphony, was it Hello or what, that the stuff, it's almost like if you ever heard the very first Randy Newman album, the most uncommercial record with all the strings and the orchestration.
Yeah, I know, because the Lorca album is a real avant-garde album as well, isn't it? I think that's probably about 79, 80s, it's something like that. Right. But yeah, lovely stuff. An incredible voice, distinctive voice as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Something a little bit more recent. I don't know whether you know this album. Another album which was much maligned. Terence Trent D'Arby, yeah. So in 87, 88, Terence Trent D'Arby, his debut album, Introducing the Hardline According to Terence Trent D'Arby, was a massive hit. It sold, I think, about 8 million copies. You know, it was a big hit in the US, big hit in the UK. Some huge singles on it, stuff like If You Let Me Stay, Wishing Well, Sign Your Name. And he followed it up with this. I mean, perhaps the artwork gives you a bit of an indication of where his mind was at that point, you know, sort of hiding his face, etc. But it was absolutely panned by the critics. It sold a fraction of what Introducing the Hardline sold. But I love this album. I bought this in my copy that came out at the time. It came out in 89. I think part of the problem with this album, I don't know if you agree with this, but the running order on an album really affects your opinion of it. You know, it's the same songs, but if the running order isn't right, if it doesn't work, then that can totally affect your opinion of it. And I think this is one of those. The album almost whispers in, you know, there's a just like almost like a spoken word intro, and then almost an a cappella song that follows it. And the record gradually builds, but by which point you get to the sort of the stronger, single, catchier songs, I think it's almost already lost its audience, you know. So, but I would suggest anybody that likes that sort of late 80s Prince sounds to check this one out. I think it's a record that's really worth hearing.
Good point.
Yeah, really good stuff. Yeah, really good stuff.
Good point about arranging and order. Track listing is so important. It's almost like a science. I mean, not really. The soul of it. You got to feel how it flows. You can't do 3 rock songs and all the ballads together. But yeah, you want it to build, but you need something to grab them early on too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always think that you know, most of my favorite records start with a big tune, you know, like a statement of intent. You know, that's what you're going to do. But as I say, this almost whispers in. It doesn't quite get going until three or four tracks into it. I say, by which point I think it would have lost the attention of certainly of reviewers. I think that's the problem with a record reviewer listening to a record once or twice and then making an opinion on it. You know, perhaps if this was a record that they'd lived with for a period of time, then they might have had a different opinion. But yeah, I do think that, you know, particularly when you're relying on reviews, you need a big opener, a big start, and that doesn't have that. But it's a good album. It's something I recommend.
Okay. You know what's interesting about doing these YouTube videos the last 3 years now is obviously it really allows all of us to revisit our collection. I play a lot of music. I have a lot, and people always say, "How can you listen? Why do you need all that?" Well, it's there when I want it. I don't really do streaming, and I don't do that stuff. And maybe it's an age generational thing, but it's there. But I really like pulling things out and showcasing. And I know about most of these records pretty well, but it all of a sudden it reminds me at a time and a place when I got it. And this next record, I did not get. I got it at a time when it came out, and this is a little different, a little offbeat on the concept because this artist never sold records, so it's not like he had great records to make a shitty record. And it's probably not a shitty record. His band, the band he was in, made one of the most infamous, I should say, records of the San Francisco psychedelic sound period. And of course, the band was Moby Grape, their debut album in 1967. It's considered one of the great rock and roll albums that the record company totally screwed them over. Columbia Record, I think, released 4 or 5 singles at once. A big marketing promo
Right.
to do. So nobody knew what to play. Nobody played anything. You know, Omaha would have been the great single on that. And later the ballad 805 would have been great. But
yeah,
he goes crazy. He has obviously drug issues, mental issues. And this is Skip Spence, Alexander Spence. I mean, this has become a cult record. It's a freak folk record again. Before we knew it was freak folk, it was him fucking around in his studio, doing weird things, ambient things, and it's a great record. I mean, it's even spawned off a great coverage record with people like Robert Plant and Beck and all these other people covering this entire record. This is an expanded Sundays that has all the outtakes. So you got 3 records or more of this bizarre stuff, but it's great. It's folky, it's ambient, it's echoey, it's almost like if you ever heard the records of Daniel Johnson, who's sort of this
Yeah.
artistic artist that
Yeah.
made things that, if you're into that, almost like it's Americana before Americana, I guess. It's really a cool record. Not for everybody. And again, I can't compare it like it's someone like John Lennon that made these great records with the
Yeah.
bass solo and puts out this crap sometime in New York City. I think this is a really interesting record that had no audience when it came out on Columbia. And even I bought it because of Moby Grape, because I lived in San Francisco, and I probably played it once or twice, didn't get it. It was on my shelf for years. Mid 90s when I purged a bunch of my records that went away, my original. And then of course I got into it. It found an audience and it found me again, or for maybe even for the first time.
Isn't it interesting how a record sort of grows over time? You know, as you say that you bought it at the time, it sat on your shelf for, I don't know, 30 years or whatever. And, you know, I don't know, 35, 40 years later, it appeals to you. So, you know, I know it's a cliche of somebody being ahead of their time, but it's,
Well, I've talked
yeah.
about, there was one of the contests on the VC the last couple of years and about records. And I realized people say, why don't you sell that? You're not into that right now. Like I go through a jazz phase but I realized, you know, I'm old enough that I've gone through this phase. I realized some of the records in 95, when I got rid of, were stuff that I just thought, you know, that's a little too lightweight for me. I was more into maybe that period indie stuff and then the post-punk stuff. And so I got rid of some of these great records, but every 3 years you go through like, even though with all the Beatles I show, I can't listen to Beatles all the time. And then maybe for a year or more or whatever, I don't listen to any. And then I get into this groove again about something about, you know, with you watching your videos, all the soul music. So I had to make a soul video. I don't know half as much what you know, but most of those records you show, not the singles, but the albums, I used to see those come through the store. I just never listened to them. You know, like I didn't know, I saw every friggin' Spinners record or OJ's record or, you know, I remember buying this, bringing home the single. I loved that 3 Degrees single, When Will I See You Again? There was something about that 45. I never bought an album. And I just remember in the 70s, we would sell a shitload of soul records for a short time and they would actually die. They would stop selling after 6 months. Whereas most stuff would sell for years. At that point, they had a shorter shelf life, which I never really thought of that much at the time, but just except for Stevie Wonder, obviously, and Marvin Gaye. Most of those soul records were big and then they died.
That's the great thing about the VC. I mean, watching VC videos every day, you can watch something and think, you know, I've never heard. Like you've just shown a few records there I've never heard. At some point over the future weeks, I'll think to pick them out and I'll pick them up in the store, or whatever. But that, you know, it does influence what you're listening to. You watch a video and somebody shows, you know, it might be something as obvious as a Beatles record, but it might be something like Skip Spence, which, you know, you might never come across, and you think, well, I'll give that a go. It's a good thing, the VC.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So perhaps quite obvious for me, but you know, I'm a big Prince fan, and I know that you have this album as well. I've seen you show this before. There you go. Yeah. So the Rainbow Children.
I'm not going to show it now, but you can talk about it. But I love this record.
Yeah. I mean, I've said before that this is one of my favorite Prince albums. So everybody knows that run of albums that he had in the 1980s, a perfect run of albums. You know, say from, I don't know, Dirty Mind through to Love Sexy. This, for me, is the best album from the later part of his career. Now, I suppose a bit of history. The album that came out before this was a record called Raven to the Joy Fantastic. And the idea was that this was going to be his big comeback. He signed with Arista, with Clive Davis, to distribute that album, who had recently had a big hit with Supernatural, the Santana album. So that the Santana sold something like 20 million copies of that record. And the model of that was Santana working with guest musicians. So Rob Thomas was on it, wasn't he? And Eric Clapton, different things, you know. So the idea was for Prince to do the same thing. So Raven to the Joy is fantastic. It had Sheryl Crow in it performing with him. It had Gwen Stefani. It had Chuck D was on there. But for whatever reason, bad choice of singles, bad marketing, it just didn't work. It just, you know, it was a total flop. That's some of the artwork from this. And so Prince obviously went away and he made an album which was quite uncommercial. He'd recently converted to being a Jehovah's Witness. The whole album is quite spiritual. There's songs on here about race and racism. It's quite a hard-hitting record, far jazzier than any of his other records.
Very jazzy,
very jazzy. Yeah. And it's a record that didn't sell. It didn't actually get a release in the UK, so it was only available over here on import. And I saw him a couple of times on this tour. Now, just to give you a flavour of the change in his profile, 10 years prior to this, I saw him play Wembley Stadium, which is 72,000 people. 10 years later, when he toured the Rainbow Children, he was playing what was the Hammersmith Odeon, which is a 2,000-seat arena, or 2,000-seat theatre, basically. So it was quite a come down over those years. I think people had just got sick of him. The amount of music that he was releasing, people couldn't keep up. I mean, now looking back, everybody said,
"Yeah, I was buying all the CDs, but it was hard to keep up."
Same as me, hard to keep up. But people just got sick of it. Looking back now, he's a total icon. But it's easy to forget the fact that 20 years ago, he couldn't really sell a record. I mean, he couldn't get a record released in the UK. I mean, that's saying something, isn't it? But I think this is an album that deserves to be listened to.
Pronounce his logo for a while either.
Yeah, that's right. All sorts of takes on that, the symbol. But yeah, this was actually the first album where he was known as Prince again. So this was him coming back as Prince. But yeah, great album.
Yeah, I admit that. It's funny. That was one album I think I missed for whatever reason. What year was that? Do you remember?
2001.
Okay. I don't know why I missed that one, because I was buying all the CDs. For some reason, I missed that one. And then obviously when the reissue came out with last year, 2 years ago, whenever it was, I jumped on it and I just fell in love with it. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I love that record.
Brilliant album. Good.
I'm showing one that I actually just showed in a ranking video. And this is where you cannot blame the artist, although I got this album when it came out in 1971, I'm thinking, or 72. Anyway, 71. And this is where an artist makes a record and they finish it and they go on tour, and the producer has other ideas and adds like gospel vocals, horns, strings, and puts out Byrdmaniax.
Right, okay.
I like this record a lot, but it's like opens up a song, Glory, Glory, which is kind of a big gospel song. And it's a great opener. And there's a lot of reverb on here. There's a lot of, it's a big, thick record, not thick like a Wall of Sound Spectre, but Terry Melcher, who had produced them on their first albums. And of course, Terry Melcher's the son of Doris Day, the actress.
I didn't know that.
Was a producer, did their Byrds albums, he was a Columbia A&R and producer. Of course, he was getting into the violence stuff, part of the whole Charles Manson, Dennis Wilson, Beach Boys, crazy. I think that was Terry Melcher's house where the whole murder took place. And anyway, he takes us out. The Byrds almost disown this record because they go on tour and this comes out. First of all, I love that cover. I think it's
brilliant. It's a brilliant cover. Yeah.
I think, as I recall, I was 15, 16 when this came out, and I was a member of Columbia House Record Club, and I got this as a record club pick, and I just liked it. It was different, and I'm a big Byrds fan, all variations of the Byrds, and I think it's a cool record. Obviously, there's some good writing on here. This is one I would like to hear at some point, like even if they do a CD. Do the stripped down version. I don't always necessarily have to hear stripped down, but there's some great songwriting and songs recorded. Of course, Clarence White is one of my favorite guitar players all over this, great bluegrass and just flat picking, amazing. And his Telecaster stuff is astounding. So I like that Byrdmaniax, but people hated that. Critics just ripped it apart. And it kind of wasn't their fault, You think an artist would get a sign off on something, but
yeah. So what year was that, Mazzy?
I think it's 72-ish, 71, 72. Anyway.
Right. Okay. I don't know how many I've done, but
I don't know. 71.
Right. Okay. A CD. I don't know whether you know this album. This is R.E.M.
I have a CD of it. Yeah.
Yeah, around this. I don't think it's ever come out on vinyl actually, but yes, this is the CD. So
I bought all their records.
Yeah. So right. Okay. So there's 3 parts to R.E.M's career. So first of all, you've got the IRS years, Then when they signed to Warner's, you've got that run of really big albums, you know, the likes of Out of Time and Automatic for the People and Monster. And then you've got that sort of weird period following Bill Berry leaving the band. The first album they made after Bill Berry left was Up, which is an album that I love. I think it's a great album. Mm-hmm. But gradually, it's almost like they outstayed their welcome. People just lost interest. And I think this is their penultimate album. It's their second to last album. And by this stage, I think the band have almost admitted the fact that they lost interest in the material. They lost interest in each other. You know, they've just gone on that long. But there's something about this record, which, well, certainly some of the tracks, I mean, it's certainly not a perfect record. There's a couple of songs on here that I really don't like. But it's also got a couple of songs which are possibly some of my favourite R.E.M. tracks. So the opening track, Leaving New York, was a big hit over here. I don't think this had any hit singles in the States at all. Nope. But I think Leaving New York was a top 5 single in the UK. But the other track is a song called The Boy in the Well, which, you know, if you haven't listened to it for a while or you haven't heard it before, is something I definitely recommend checking out. It's a song, as I say, it's one of my favourite R.E.M. songs. And I just find it fascinating, the fact that, you know, this isn't a bad album in the fact that they tried to do something different. This is perhaps even worse than that. People just consider it to be a bland album. You know, it doesn't offer anything. But hidden in there are a couple of cracking tracks which, again, deserve to be reevaluated. And I often think, what would happen now what sort of reception would R.E.M. get if they reformed? Is there sufficient interest, you know, or did they just go on too long and peter out?
I think people would like them to reform, maybe, but I think they'd like you two to split up, to go away.
Yeah, see, I've got a friend who's a really big U2 fan, so whenever they tour, I always go to one show with him. He always goes to see as many as he can. I always go to one show. But yeah, I understand why people hate U2. I can understand that. But you've got to admire what they're a great stadium rock band. What they do very well.
Them on their first tour in America in a club, like a club that holds a couple hundred people. Right. They were when Bowie came out, I guess, and they're great. Yeah. And I saw them a few times over the years. But R.E.M. is a band that I bought their CDs in a way as habit, because I bought every single one.
Yep.
And I saw them about 4 or 5 times. And that record and the one after, those last few records of theirs, I could not name a song like that. But what I like about them, I like them because in a way they're like it's like a oral soundscape. They're just kind of nice to put on, and you don't have to pay attention. It's almost like, even though it's not meant to be ambient, it's stuff you have on the background. It's pleasant, but it's not like that great single that they used to have, like Automatic People or Man on the Moon or whatever, or Not Jump. I'm sorry. That's
Jump.
That's the Van Halen song. No, what's the Stand? Sorry, Jump.
I Stand.
The video.
Yeah, it's a bit different about
the people are jumping.
I know what you mean, yeah.
in the video. So, and it's
this is interesting because it's keyboard based. It's predominantly keyboard based, as opposed to something like Monster, which has got those big sort of arena rock guitar type sound on it.
Who produced that?
Who produced? It's produced. Yeah, it's produced by Pat McCarthy and R.E.M. So co-produced by the band.
Okay. I'm going with America's Bard, I guess you could say. And I'm doing a twofer here, so that's cheating. But since I'm hosting, I can cheat. You can cheat too.
Okay.
This is an album that came out that the infamous review in Rolling Stone from Greil Marcus is like, it opens up with, "What is this piece of shit?" And that I love this record from the first time it came out. I think this is a really interesting record. I love, was it Wild Horses? All the Wild Horses with those gospel singers that open up. And what's great about this record now, amongst a lot of these Dylan records, even the Jesus records, with this bootleg series, I don't know if you're into those things at all. These have gotten reevaluated, and people love this stuff, hearing all of it and more of it. His voice is like, obviously after the motorcycle accident, and he's doing some cover stuff and some weird, and it's a double album, and of course it's his self-portrait. I've always loved this record, and it's one of those, I got tired of defending it for decades. And since I'm saying that, I got to show this, because a lot of people are into Dylan. They got really pissed off when Dylan did this kind of Sinatra song-based type album, and then he did another one, and then he did a triple record version of it.
Yeah.
This is like the mega edition with this beautiful, case.
Yeah.
I love this record. I like his voice. It's not a great voice. Everyone's not going to like it. But what's amazing that this is recorded in the great recording Capitol Tower recording studios in Hollywood, where Nat Cole and Sinatra and all these great people recorded, and it sounds phenomenal. I just think this is, I love this sort of religious, it's going, he's not doing the fuck you, but in a way, like I'm doing what I want. And of course he comes and makes, to me, my favorite record of last year. But he makes these songs for me work with the voice he has now, and the instrumentation and the recording. It's less is more. It's not that, like, I'm not a big fan. I don't know if you picked any of the big oldies, or not the oldies, the songbooks of Rod Stewart. I can't stand that stuff personally. To me, I'd rather have someone do it like this, and I love that Dylan did it like this. So that's my.
It's interesting. No, it's interesting because, well, first of all, Self-Portrait. That opening track is one of my favorite opening tracks on any album. I love the intro to that album.
That's the tone.
Yeah. Now, what you said, now it's interesting because my local record shop is Polar Bear Records in Birmingham, King's Heath in Birmingham. The owner, Steve, is a hardcore Dylan fan. So, imagine a record shop that whenever you walk into a record shop, he's always playing Bob Dylan. So it doesn't matter what you're talking, you have a conversation with him about any artist, the conversation, whatever the subject, will always come back to Bob Dylan. That is basically the deal. And a conversation that I had with him many times over the years was when those American Songbook albums came out. I hated them. I'll be honest with you, Mazzy, I hated them. I really didn't need to hear Bob Dylan gargle his way through those great songs. If I want to hear those songs, I'll listen to Frank Sinatra or whoever, But I say the owner of my local store kept saying he's working up to something here. He this is him trying something out. He's building up to something, and then of course he put out that album last year, and everybody loved it, and the conversation, I liked it as well. The conversation that I've had since, is that's what those great American songbook albums were all about. It was him working something and building up to that point, and which I find fascinating. But as I say, it doesn't matter what you want to talk about. Any subject always comes back to Bob Dylan. So I perhaps know a little bit more about Bob Dylan than I should do, not out of choice,
Yeah, I totally understand that. That's the thing. I don't know if you get many. I think you have probably a more polite. People are into what you're showing, the soul stuff. You probably don't get a lot of trolls trolling you about stuff.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, like I get a handful, but I think I open up. I invite it in a weird way.
Sorry about that, Mazzy. I didn't mean to do that, but yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah, you can start carry on.
But I kind of relish it because I use it as fodder for it. It's like it's tools for my next video or something down the line. But some people get very defensive about certain types of records, which is great, and they can't understand why someone would like Triplicate or whatever the record is, or how can that be your favorite, Neil Young record when we're a Zuma, or whatever the thing is.
But that's the whole point, when we got talking about a subject to talk about today, these records, I'm pretty sure that many people could listen to all 10 of the records I'm showing today and hate them all. It's opinion, isn't it? That's the whole point of it. But yeah, and this is definitely the case with the last couple of records I've got, right? So yeah, I'll save that one till last. So I've spoke about this in a video reasonably recently, and this is David Bowie's Earthling album. Now I mentioned before that, so I was born in the mid-70s. So obviously I own all those great David Bowie albums, up to Scary Monsters, whatever, Let's Dance. And they're all great records. But of course, I didn't hear them first time round. I first heard those in the 90s or whenever. He made this run of albums from the mid-90s through to the early 2000s, starting with Outside through to Reality, which is my period for David Bowie. You know, those were the albums which I queued up to buy. Those are the gigs that I saw him play on promoting those albums. Those are the albums that I played to death when they came out. And it's interesting because, you know, I've made this comment before, but, you know, old Bowie fans, you know, the Bowie fans that were into Bowie in the 70s, they loved the fact that he was experimental. They loved the fact he kept changing his sound. But when he got to the 90s, all they wanted him to do was make a record that sounded like a David Bowie record from the 1970s. They didn't want him to keep trying new things. And, you know, whatever he tried, it didn't all pay off. You know, this is a drum and bass album, and everybody said at the time, David Bowie should not be trying drum and bass. But of course, you know, he's only doing what he did before. He was a total magpie, wasn't he? Just, you know, picking bits here, picking bits there, and putting it together. And I love this album. I saw him on this tour in quite a small club in Birmingham. And to this day, it's one of the best gigs I've ever seen. But yeah, I think this, again, an album that should be reevaluated, and perhaps over time will be now, you know, that we're looking back at his career after he's passed away.
I had the CD of that. I like that record. I mean,
yeah, it's good.
But, you know, it's funny. Those last records he did, the last maybe 4 or 5, the one that's the parody of the Heroes cover. And all
the next day.
I revisited those around the time of his death and I like those so much more. They're thick, they're loud albums. I like his God, what's the one before that where he does a cover of a George Harrison song on it?
Oh yeah, that's on. So Try Some Buy Some on
right.
On
not
Reality.
That song, but the song Bring Me the Disco King with that piano on it.
Yes.
I realized I should have used that piano on this piano video I did recently. I love that track. That track I would play over and over and over.
Yeah.
And those records, you know, the next day, I guess, I like those albums a lot. They're rock and roll. They're intense records, but they're really, really good. You know, so
it's funny you should mention that song, because I mentioned that song, Bring Me the Disco King, in a recent video. And I saw Bowie on that tour on Reality. I saw him 2 nights play at the Birmingham NEC. And I had tickets quite close to the front. And the guy sitting next to me, I mean, the set list was pretty much 2 classic tracks, 2 new tracks, 2 classic tracks, and it went on like that for a 28 song set, you know, so, you know, half of the song with the big hits. But halfway through, he played Bring Me the Disco King, at the end of which the guy sitting next to me stood up in you know, disgrace and just basically said, you know, that man has been a complete wanker tonight. That's what he said. I know you're a big fan of that word, man. That man has been a complete wanker tonight. And of course, it's quite a quiet song. You know, the room was silent. David Bowie clearly heard the guy sitting next to me call him a wanker, you know? So he's looking a little bit, you know, not upset, but surprised by the fact that he's halfway through a show playing, you know, predominantly hits, and somebody quite close to the front is calling him a wanker. But a great song, got a real jazzy touch to it. So it's a nice album, Reality.
Yeah. Reality, that's it, right? Was that your last one?
Is that the last one, is it? I don't know. Are you done now?
No.
Are you going? One more. I think we got one more.
I have 2 more.
Okay.
But this next one I'm going to show, I'm not going to say anything about it because there's nothing you can say about it, how terrible it is. And it's when a handful of artists got together and did something, and they were at the peak of their sales potential and popularity in the 70s. And is this.
All right, yeah.
The Bee Gees.
Yeah.
Peter Frampton. The only good thing of this record, I think, is Got to Get You Into My Life. Is that on here? No. Am I thinking the Isley Brothers? Is that version on here?
No, Earth, Wind and Fire.
Earth, Wind and Fire. That's on here, right?
Yeah.
That's.
I don't know. Is that on there? Is it? I don't know. Is it on there?
I'm trying to think. What? All of a sudden, I started doubting myself, thinking, like, wait, when did that come out? Maybe it's not on here. What movie was that from? That was from a soundtrack. It's not on here. Anyway, I love their version. Got to Get You Into My Life.
Yeah, it's a great version.
Ever. So never mind. Right. Aerosmith. Yeah. I know my Beatles shit. I don't know my Beatles cover shit, but this record is so terrible. This is when I worked in the record business, so I got a promo. Demonstration promo from my friends at RSO Records and Polygram, and we all went to a preview of the movie. Oh my God. And these were like, record industry radio people and all, and some fans. People booed at, at the end of it. It was so bad. So
I've never seen it. I've never seen
it.
it. Yeah. No, I've never seen it. I should try and see it, shouldn't I really? But
no.
It's that bad, is it? That bad. Right. Well, I've got another.
Played the record in probably 30 years. So I think one day when no one's around, I should put it on and just see. Maybe it's one of those like rediscovered masterpieces.
I doubt it.
Okay. You do one. I got one more
Right.
at the end.
Yeah, I've got one more. Well, yeah. So I've got two to pick from.
Okay.
Right. So I've got a real. Yeah. So right, I've got two real proper bargain basement 1-star albums here. So one of which deserves to be a 1-star album, and I'm talking about albums being reappraised and reevaluated. First of all, this is an album that does not deserve to be reappraised or reevaluated. This is Chinese Democracy by Guns N' Roses. And the reason why I'm showing this is because this album would never be made today. I find, again, totally fascinating. This album took, is it 13 years to make and $10 million? And, the way that the music industry works. No, right. So the way that the music industry works nowadays, that would never happen. This album cost Geffen Records $10 million to make, and it wasn't Geffen, yeah. So it took so long to make that I bought this the day it came out, just purely because of the hoopla and the about it, and it sounded dated the day that it came out because it was because it's taken so long to make. It's an awful album. I played it the other day. We're talking about making this video. I thought I'll give that another listen. Perhaps that has some hidden gems in there. It really doesn't. It's an awful record. This, on the other hand.
So how come? So Neil Young gets sued by Geffen, but Guns N' Roses doesn't.
I know. Yeah. Well, there you go. But then perhaps Geffen learned his lesson. He didn't get away with the first lawsuit, did he? So, right. So. I don't really know this album. This is a covers album, and we mentioned before. Obviously, I live in Birmingham in the UK. This band are from Birmingham, in the UK. This is Duran. Oh, yeah. So this album came out in 1994. They'd previously had a big album with the Wedding album, which contained the single "Ordinary World," and they went away. And this is an example of a band totally not getting what their fan base see them as. They see themselves as being something totally different. They went away and made a covers album of the songs that inspired them. So it's full of Iggy Pop, Public Enemy, Grandmaster Flash, The Doors, all these sort of bands that they're covering here. Clearly, they don't see themselves as being a big pop band. Their fan base just want more songs that sound like Wham, but Duran see themselves as being another Bob Dylan or whatever, or Lou Reed, whatever. The album itself, it died when it came out. It got 1 star everywhere. They cover 911 is a Joke by Public Enemy. They cover White Lines by Grandmaster Flash, The Crystal Ship by The Doors, Watching the Detectives by Elvis Costello, Thank You by Led Zeppelin. It's such a misjudged record, but because it's so misjudged, it appeals. It's an interesting record to hear. It's dated quite badly. I say it's been slated, left, right, and centre, but I've always had a bit of a soft spot for it, just because, well, first of all, they're from Birmingham. I always check out their music for that reason. They live quite local to me here, but yeah, just to be so far away from the reality of how your fans see you. I find it fascinating. Cool.
My final offering is, God, I'm bringing David Geffen back into the story again. A record that came out, it didn't come out, it was being recorded. Geffen didn't like that there were only, I think, 7 songs. And so he wanted them to do more. They might have done one more, I don't remember. I think it only doesn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it has 8 songs. So they added one more song. It was a different direction for the artist, who was never a big seller on his own, but now this has become this huge cult record, and that's No Other by Gene Clark, obviously original member of the Byrds on the first 2 albums, their initial great songwriter. This album bombed. David Geffen, when he got it, wouldn't promote it, wouldn't put it out. I got it again. This is my record store days. So this is 1974. I saw him the following year in a club that wasn't even full. 2 nights in a row I went. I love Gene Clark and his, what we'd call a little bit Americana now and everything. But this record, just his look, he got all glammed up, which is totally not what he's about. This is a beautifully brilliant record. Life's Greatest Fool, Sister Raven, No Other. It's got these kind of long guitar bits in a moody way. It's a soulful record. It's an unusual record. Thomas Jefferson Kay produced it. And this has been reissued. This has found an audience. It's been reissued with I have a box set with this and the CD outtakes and stuff. It's a wonderful album. It might be the best album I'm showing today that is really a good album, not a forced. It just either was ahead of its time, it was before its time, or who people knew Gene Clark as the country guy or the folk country rock guy. This wasn't that. And so it was a whole different thing.
It's interesting because that's an album that I heard about a long time before I actually heard the music. And the reason being was up until I think probably the late 90s or early 2000s, it wasn't available on CD. Right. So you couldn't get hold of a vinyl copy unless you had an original. You got hold of an original. So I kept reading articles about this record or people being interviewed and citing it as being a major influence, but I could never, ever hear the music. Obviously, this is I suppose, almost pre-internet. And it wasn't until it was reissued on CD, which I think was probably early 2000s, that I first heard the music myself. And it's funny that build-up often disappoints, but in this case it didn't. I've been hearing about it for years, never got to hear the music myself, but when I finally got around to hearing the album, I absolutely loved it.
It's one of those records, again, in 74, we would play this in the store because the guy that hired me was into the Byrds like me and all this country rock, even though it wasn't country. Every time we'd play it, people would buy it. That's how we'd sold it. But, 2 copies here, 3 copies a copy. So it wasn't this massive hit, and it never really caught on. And I think you're right. I think actually it developed this following in the UK and in Amsterdam, in Europe. The Europeans always discover the music that the Americans toss away, like Ry Cooder or something, or that type of stuff. So it didn't get a following, but I just I loved it, and it's a record that just feels good every time I put it on. There's a mood to it. Not a great hit record, and I could see Geffen in 1974 when he was putting out Joni Mitchell and Linda Ronstadt and the Jackson Browne and the Eagles. I mean, come on, this isn't that.
Beautiful record though. Something I haven't heard in years, so I should dig it out.
There you go. We hope that's what's great about these. We get influenced by things to dig out and stuff. So
that's it. Cool.
All right. I'm going to close this off in a bit and hold off. Don't leave after I do that. But thanks, John, for watching, for participating. And great idea. I like that you came up with this idea because I've been wanting to collaborate with you because I love your passion for the music you play.
We should do a soul video at some point in the future. Yeah. So good.
Yeah.